And joining us now with more on the war in Gaza and the latest developments in the region is Brian Katulis, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So the war in Lebanon may be temporarily on pause, but it doesn't mean that the war is over. And there are a lot of developments in the Middle East. Let's start with Gaza and Trump's statement about the hostages. I mean, do you think this will have a real impact on Hamas or on Iran and Qatar and Turkey, who are, let's say, supporters of Hamas?
Probably not. I mean, these are vicious terrorist groups, Hamas, and some of their supporters. I think the other question is whether it'll have an impact on the current Israeli government, which, as you know, has sort of fallen apart over the last few months because of divisions amongst its own leaders about this very same issue, about whether there's a clear end game plan in Gaza. You see the protests in your own country about people who are really discontent with the current leadership in Israel. So there's, I think, a collective shared shame and blame here about what's gone on about these hostages. My heart goes out to their families. I don't think a statement by Trump himself will actually change those dynamics, which, again, at its core, starts with this vicious terrorist group, Hamas. But then it is, you know, these hostages held for hundreds of days is the product of poor leadership in the Middle East, in Qatar, Egypt, the U.S., as well as the current Israeli government.
And in Lebanon, the ceasefire is holding, but we already see that Hezbollah is breaching it, and Israel is being urged by the Biden administration not to respond. In other words, let Hezbollah resume its terror activities unimpeded. I mean, what do you make of this?
I think it was a weak ceasefire when it was announced. I think the balance of forces, the fact that Israel's been attacked for more than a year by Hezbollah. I mean, this is a longer story, too, that goes all the way back, I think, to Tehran and its links to the axis of resistance, so-called, that Iran has across the region. So I saw this as a temporary pause. I mean, I hope it holds because everyone would like there to be peace. But the simple fact of the matter is Israel's threatened, as you mentioned, from 7 different sides in this war of attrition. The other problem is the failure of leadership in the Israeli government for not actually having a clear plan to build partnerships across the region. I spent a lot of time in places like Riyadh and Abu Dhabi recently, and there's just dismay about the overall situation that Iran is provoking here with Hezbollah and Hamas, but also dismay about the poor leadership they see from not just Washington, D.C. only, but also from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, where there is nothing more than a reactive crisis management plan, which is trying to protect its own citizens, but doesn't really have a vision for what's next and what are the opportunities around the region.
And I want to turn now to Syria. A lot of developments on this end. It's quite a mess over there. The so-called rebels taking over Aleppo and advancing to Homs. And now Iran has announced it might be sending troops to help Assad's regime. Can you maybe make sense of it all? And how is this going to affect Israel should Iran actually send troops into Syria?
I think, you know, Syria has been a threat to Israel and is one of these pieces of the equation for Iran's axis of resistance. It's got millions of people who don't agree with the Assad regime or the regimes that back it, Russia and Iran. It's a mess, as you said. I think this is a chronic condition. It could lead to an uptick of increased threats, unfortunately, to Israel. I think Israel's military has been quite capable in trying to thwart with pretty stunning and important action inside of Syria. Even before the campaign in Lebanon, if you recall, Israeli forces actually going in on the ground in addition to airstrikes in Syria and taking care of business to try to protect Israel's citizens. It's important that it continues to do that. But all of these different pieces, the different Islamist groups that are part of the opposition in the northwest, the Kurdish groups, and the fact that perhaps not Iranian troops themselves, forces, but Iranian-backed militias from Iraq are coming in. It's this vortex, which it's been like for the last several years, could threaten Israel's security, but I wouldn't, given that Israel has a strong military and it defends its own citizens, I think it'll be okay. What we need, though, is a clearer strategy, not only from the United States, but from the current Israeli government about what it's going to do long term to protect its people.
Absolutely. So a clear vision for the future is what's needed across the Middle East. Hopefully with the new Trump administration, we'll see that coming from Washington and from Jerusalem. Brian, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Great to be with you.